Since arriving on Earth for the second time, Tarble had felt like something of an outsider. The Earthlings still seemed afraid of him, despite Yamcha's assurances. He supposed he couldn't blame them, he did come here as an invader originally. Tarble and his brother still weren't on speaking terms, unfortunately. Tarble's version of Super Saiyan was incomplete, but it was still more than Vegeta could do, and it had hurt his pride. Tarble spent the majority of his time training to try and master the power he'd unlocked on Namek, and he wouldn't mind attaining the power he'd seen Goku use. Tarble didn't quite understand the difference between the two, but he knew whatever he had done wasn't nearly as strong. If Goku was a Super Saiyan, then he supposed he was a false Super Saiyan. Even so, he was still the strongest person on Earth. So he spent his time training with Piccolo. They spent a lot of time together, but he wouldn't call them friends, they were just preparing for the next threat, which unfortunately wouldn't take too long, as one day, out of the blue, they would sense two enormous energies approaching the planet. Is that? No doubt about it. It's Frieza, and someone else is even stronger. Piccolo confirmed Tarble's fear. Well, that's probably his father, Great King Cold. If he's here, then it might not be about saving this planet anymore. It'll be about living to fight another day. What are you saying? I'm saying it'd probably be a good idea to have a few people on standby to try and head to New Namek and use their Dragon Balls to bring this planet back. They would communicate this plan to the other fighters, and eventually it was decided that Yamcha, Tien, and Chaozu would remain at Capsule Corp just in case, while Piccolo, Gohan, Krillin, Vegeta, and Tarble went to intercept Frieza. Tarble chose not to comment on Vegeta's shirt since he himself was dressed in a cheap tracksuit. Of course, Tarble's plans would turn out to be unnecessary. As they approached, they felt the energy of Frieza's soldiers all disappear at once. Someone else was already here. As the scene came into view, they would see a young man transforming into a Super Saiyan, which prompted Frieza to attempt to destroy the planet. But, like in the original, it didn't work. Tarble decided to try and approach while Cold watched Frieza fight Trunks, but he wouldn't even get a chance to do anything as Trunks defeated Frieza without much difficulty before turning his attention to King Cold, before Tarble could so much as make a move. "You can leave this one to me." Cold would look behind him for whoever the man was talking to and shot Tarble a look that made him a little glad he didn't have to fight him. The young man, however, had no trouble with the tyrant, dispatching Cold easily even without his sword. Once that was taken care of, the young man would explain who he was and what he was doing here, before telling him to come with him to meet Goku in a couple hours. In the meantime, Tarble would attempt to talk to the young man, but he seemed quite standoffish and wasn't interested in conversation. Eventually, he would give up and wound up in conversation with Gohan. "So, that person has to be a Saiyan, right?" Gohan asked, looking over to Trunks. "I suppose so, but all Saiyans have black hair. It turns grey when we get older, but aside from that, it's all black. And as far as I know, the only Saiyans left were me, Vegeta, your father, Raditz, and Nappa." "Nappa, that's the one that I..." Gohan looked as if he might be sick. "It's not your fault. It was him or you." "I don't care. That felt awful. I never want to do that again." Tarble couldn't really argue with that. He understood not wanting to kill, and with everything that had gone on, he hadn't a moment to consider how similar he and Gohan were. Well, hopefully you won't need to. And hope was all it was. He didn't know it would happen, he just had to hope this kid wouldn't be put in another situation like that. Goku showed up on schedule, and Trunks gave him his warning as well as letting it slip who his parents were. Thankfully nobody overheard. Well, aside from Piccolo, but he wouldn't tell anyone. The group would go their separate ways for a while to train. Since Piccolo had Tarble to train with this time, Goku decided to train Gohan himself. Unfortunately, Vegeta still wasn't interested in training with his brother. He would train by himself using the gravity chamber at Capsule Corp, so his relationship with Bulma still happens. Tarble's presence doesn't change that. A few days later after a sparring match, Tarble decided to ask for a few more details about the androids from Piccolo. "So this Dr. Gero, Goku has fought him before?" "Not directly, or I don't think so anyway. He was part of a group that tried to conquer the Earth when Goku was 13. They were called the Red Ribbon Army, so he probably wants revenge." "What was the Red Ribbon Army like?" "I don't know. It was before I hatched." "Huh? I didn't realize you were that young." "Warrior Namekians reach maturity quickly. I'm only 11 years old." Deciding not to question his rather confusing biology, Tarble settled on asking Goku about the Red Ribbon Army. So the next day, he did just that. "Well, I was a kid when I fought them, so I've been hit in the head a lot since then. But I remember there was General Blue who could paralyze me, and there was this other guy, Colonel something or other, but he wasn't that tough. I never actually met Commander Red. Apparently his second in command shot him, and then I fought him and this giant robot." "No, I meant anything about the androids. Did they use them back then?" "Well, there was this one guy who spat missiles. I think he was an android, but he ran out of batteries. That guy didn't sound like much of a threat. Not really comparable to those two, who were supposedly stronger than Frieza." "Anything else?" There's Ater. Android 8. Never met 1 through 7, though. I didn't have to fight him. He doesn't believe in violence, even though he was stronger than I was at the time." "So where is Ater now. He probably still lives in Jingle Village. I haven't been there in years. You know what? You want to meet him, right? Well, how about you, me, and Gohan head to Jingle Village? On this short notice? What about your wife? Well, we'll bring her as well. She always likes to spend time as a family. Well, now Tarble felt like he was intruding. Nonetheless, though, the Son family plus Tarble headed to Jingle Village. The only people Goku knew were a woman named Suno and her mother. Suno was sort of like the village's unofficial mayor. Goku, it's been so long. Hey, Suno, is Ada around? Chi-Chi would apologize for Goku's to-the-pointedness before introducing herself as well as Gohan. Oh, and this is Tarble. He's from space. I'm not from space. Nobody's from space. I'm from a planet, just not this planet. Once introductions were out of the way, Suno would help them find Android 8, leading to more introductions. Once that was taken care of, Chi-Chi decided that she, Goku, and Gohan should spend some time as a family, leaving Tarble with 8 and Suno. Goku didn't mind since he'd only been here to say hello, and Tarble was the one that wanted to talk to them anyway. Though Tarble felt a touch awkward since he didn't know these two. No need to be nervous. If you're a friend of Goku, I'm sure you're a good person. 8 reassured him, though Tarble wasn't sure that he agreed. He was nice by Saiyan standards, but he had still helped capture planets when he worked for Frieza. He'd killed innocents. He didn't like doing it, but he'd still done it. He could have refused orders. He would have been killed for it, but it just means he put his life above countless others. Eventually he realized he was spiraling and snapped back to the task at hand. I'm just gonna ask you a few questions, if that's okay, Ader? Of course. Were you built by a man named Dr. Gero? Yes, he and Dr. Flap. Gero is a bad man, but he couldn't get me to listen to him. Dr. Flap? He and Gero were colleagues, but Dr. Flap was being coerced. He didn't want to work for Red Ribbon. So, the androids weren't 100% obedient. Tarble could use that, and this Dr. Flap character might be worth talking to. Gero put a bomb in me before I was sent to Muscle Tower to try to make me obey, but I still wouldn't. But then Goku destroyed the remote, and Dr. Flap removed the bomb. And where is Dr. Flap now? Oh, he has a cabin not far from the village, Suno answered for 8. He'll fix pretty much anything we bring him. Suno offered to show Tarble the way, and the two left making conversation along the way. They did for a moment consider inviting Goku along to meet Dr. Flap, but he and Gohan were currently busy eating a local restaurant out of business. So, Goku says you're not from Earth? I'm not. I'm a Saiyan, like Goku. Goku being an alien honestly explained a lot. No human kid could storm a military base by themselves and live to tell the tale. Me and Goku actually took Ader's Dr. Flap to get the bomb removed when we were kids. To this day, that trip is one of the most exciting things to ever happen to me. Not every day she was attacked by a ninja, and then she was almost blown up. Needless to say, those memories still stuck with her all these years later. Haven't seen him since then, and now he shows up with a wife and a kid because you wanted something. It's like he's never heard of a social call. Oh, I'm sorry? Oh, don't be. I'm just surprised is all. I wasn't confident I'd ever see him again. The pair would arrive at Dr. Flap's house, and Suno introduced Tarble to the man, who seemed genuinely amazed to meet an alien. But his mood soured when the topic turned to his former partner. Gero. I suppose it makes sense he's alive. Stubborn old goat. He has to be 80 by now. You'd think he'd be too old to hold a grudge. Please, sir, you helped him make androids in the past. Do you have any advice? I could show you the schematics for Android 8. The androids he's building now will probably be more advanced, but the basic hardware should be the same. Tarble suggested sending a copy to Bulma, since he assumed these plans would make more sense to her than they did to him. Bulma and Flap would begin comparing notes over email, coming up with strategies and potential weaknesses for the androids, although they weren't ironclad since they were based on older models. Vegeta scoffed at the idea. Well, that's typical of my brother. Not strong enough to fight them properly, so he looks for weaknesses and shortcuts. I think it's just sensible planning. Bulma didn't agree with him, but she knew better than trying to change Vegeta's mind, especially when it came to fighting. Tarble chose to remain in Jingle Village for the time being, with Suno offering him a spare room in her home. He was still training for the androids, but he figured by observing Android 8 he may be able to learn something about them. He wondered, if the androids Gero were making now were anything like Android 8, then perhaps they could also be rehabilitated. The village was a small community, so it didn't take long for Tarble to become relatively well known, since he was, well, an alien. But it was more than that. His good nature and willingness to help had made him something of a local hero. He took care of poachers in the area, helped with hunting, as well as helping with repairs, as well as he could. He'd assisted in repairing his space pod from time to time, but he only knew the basics. Still, it was enough to lend a helping hand. I don't know how we managed without you. Suno would praise Tarble with a smile, handing him a hot drink after he'd helped dig a car out of the snow. He would spend 4 days a week training with Piccolo, and spend 3 days helping around the village, growing closer to Suno in this time. After a year's time, the two had gotten together, and about 6 months after that, they'd had a daughter, with bright red hair like her mother, who they had named Kyo. For those counting, that's a play on the vegetable radicchio. Kyo doesn't exist in the future, since Tarble only met Suno because he travelled to Jingle Village to learn about the androids, and he only did that because Trunks warned them. Vegeta had visited once to meet his niece, but he wasn't very talkative during the visit. Trunks was stillborn as in the original, and Trunks and Kyo had met a few times, and they seemed to get along, as well as babies could anyway. Soon the full 3 years would pass, with barely a word between the siblings. Tarble still hasn't managed to transform into Super Saiyan, but he has mastered the false Super Saiyan form. He was stronger than Frieza and King Cold now, even using his lesser form of Super Saiyan. So, he was confident as he could be about fighting the androids. As for Vegeta, Tarble wasn't sure where he was. He'd been at Capsule Corp, but apparently he'd run off a few weeks ago to perfect something without any distractions. He didn't even bother to meet up with the main group on the day the androids were supposed to arrive. So, have you seen my brother? Tarble would ask Tien as he arrived. He was the last here, as Gohan, Goku, Piccolo, Krillin, Tien, and Yamcha had all arrived before him, along with Bulma, though he questioned why she was here since she wasn't a fighter. Haven't seen him, but I wouldn't be too worried. There's no way he'd miss out on a fight like this. He was probably right. Vegeta's pride wouldn't allow him to miss this, since apparently they defeated him in the future. A man who Tarble didn't recognize would arrive and give Goku a bag of beans before going to leave. Then he was shot down. They couldn't make the two figures out because of the smoke, and before they could make a move, the two took off towards the city. With no key to sense, the group has no choice but to blindly search for their new enemies. Right, that seems like a good place to stop. I'd love to get some feedback in the comments, so let me know your thoughts, if you want. And if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. Aside from that, if you have any ideas for what ifs, let me know, I'll be sure to consider them. I have a few more ideas planned for the future, but if you've got your own ideas, I'd love to hear them. Bye!